Welcome to this session. It's called Share Acquisition of Networked Services. The first speaker is Einar Blåberg from Sunet. He's a product manager for the Sunet's box service. He's also the Nordic coordinator for the work with box. Einar will give us a talk about tendering and delivering a cloud storage service for the Nordic entrants and universities. He will discuss some obstacles, some lessons learned, and why we should work together.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. So that's the topic. Who am I? You already heard most of it. I'm also a full-time dad and a part-time boxer. So this is actually my first time away from my homework, being my daughter. The outline of the presentation, I'm going to talk about what the service is and the adoption in the different Nordic countries, and then do some lessons learned and thoughts on the future. Did the sound? No. What's Box.com? It's an enterprise-oriented cloud storage and collaboration service. The quote there is actually from their webpage. I guess most of you have heard about it. It's an enterprise Dropbox. I won't go into details. It uses our federations, our IDPs, to log on and create accounts, so that lessens the work for the universities. The universities all have their own sites with their own users and own administrators, which means that the NREN can't go snooping into the university's data. And they're also a sponsor of the Nordnet conference. I should mention that. Short history recap. In 2012, the Swedish tender was done, and we had pilots up running the same spring. We launched the service after the summer, mostly due to summer holidays taking place in the middle there. The Nordic tender was done last year, and as you can see, I used the Norwegian dates. Those were the ones I could find in my inbox. It's about double the time from the tender was actually done to the service was launched. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the lessons learned later. Status in the different countries right now. Sweden, we've had a steady growth since the start. Overall a popular service. We've got about 21,000 users, 35 terabytes of storage, which might sound much, but if you divide those two figures, you realize that the average storage is about 1.5 gigabyte per user. So with Box offering unlimited storage, it really doesn't do them much on their end. We've got 28 sites. 2 of those are demo sites, but we've got about 20 universities and a couple of organizations using the service. Norway, growing number of users. We hope that we'll get a better momentum soon. Working with Box to drive adoption. 700 user, 11 sites. If you want to know more, Frode is sitting in the audience. He's the product manager on the Uninet side. Finland, launched, but low or slow adoption. Customers speaking about them wanting in-country data to be in the US. A bit of an uncertain future, hopefully bright. It sounded brighter today than it did last week. Denmark, last but least, probably won't launch the service, mostly due to the cost of the work to actually get the contract done and deploy and market the service. So that's the status in the different countries. The adoption in Sweden, steady growth, as I said. I think we are starting to see, at least on each university, a decrease in the increase of users, mostly because all of the users wanting to use the service has created an account by now. They start using it, not just creating an account, but using it. So the storage line will hopefully go up further, where the user line will start to even out. So why use the service and why not use the service? The biggest reason to offer the service is that the users will solve their needs in one way or the other. If the university can offer them a supported service where the university actually have control over the data, that's the biggest selling point, really. Still, users will use Dropbox, they will use OneDrive, they will use G Drive. This way the university can say that this is where you're supposed to store your data. Please do so. With a common Nordic tender, we have a lot of users. That actually lowers the prices quite a lot. Using the same service and the same setup, well, mostly, we all have our different federations and our different ways to do stuff. But using the same services in the whole Nordics or within a whole country simplifies the setup and deployment, not for the first customer, but for the second and third and fifth and 10th. Since I had a why use the service, I better have a why not use the service. Jan at Uninet had a very nice quote: "The service is just what we need, but..." It's US based, with all the Snowden and, well, different governmental agencies in Sweden and the US listening into traffic. People are a bit hesitant to store data in the US. It's also the fact by now that everyone is already using at least a cloud storage service. And for an end user, there really ain't those big reasons to switch all your content over to Box. It doesn't solve that many problems that they are having. And for the university, it's still a cost, even with a low price tag. It costs in deployment, it costs in support, and there is, of course, a per user license cost. Why the different adoptions? These are my thoughts on it. The Swedish tender was done since some of the universities said, we really need this service, please do a common tender. So we had a couple of forerunner universities that more or less promised that once the tender is done, we will deploy this service, we will start using it. And those pilots and forerunners helped to build momentum needed. They did use cases, security analysis, they did FAQs, those small things that I, as a product manager on the Sunet side, can show to the next customers that, oh, this is what your colleagues at another university thought of the service, this is what they did with the service. And of course, the Swedish rollout started before Sunet, before Snowden, and started before all the universities started looking at 365, which I think that more or less everyone is doing right now. We also had dedicated people, both at the NDN and with Box. Box has been growing really fast. When we launched the service in Sweden, we were actually speaking to people in the US. The time differences were a bit of a, meeting times were interesting. By now they have a European office, and that's great for meeting times and great for being able to actually see each other. But on the other hand, you get further and further away from the people actually doing the technical work. All right, second part. Lessons learned on the Nordic tender, as well as some thoughts on the future and the NDN's role. Questions after that? About the common Nordic tender. So the time from the tender framework to from the tender being done to the framework contract, the contract that the different NDNs are supposed to call on, it took about 3 months. And even with the framework, where everyone hoped that, oh, this is the contracts are done, we just need an instance for each NDN, it took another 4 months. And and with data handling agreements between the NRENs and Nordnet for the proxy service, and contracts between the NREN and the universities, the sum is at almost a year from the tender to the launch service, which means that, I mean, if we are supposed to do these kinds of tenders, we need to speed this process up. Hopefully, we have learned our lessons this time, and next time we can do this faster. It also takes a lot of time to roll out the service to users. I mean, we say we have launched the service as we as an NREN are happy. And we get our first customer and we set up a site, but then they have to, or the university have to actually start using it, get end users to use it. And if that takes a year or 2 years and the whole tender period is 4 years, it means that when we have users using the service, then it's time to, well, hopefully not, but change into another service, since the next procurement process might end up with a different service provider. Cloud services are also changing very fast. When we did the first tender, quotas were still something that we discussed. By now, everyone is offering at least 1 terabyte or unlimited storage, as Box does. So we really need to work together to shorten the time from tender to actually launch service. Lessons learned larger than Box. I like that topic. The biggest benefits that I see or we see is actually not the Box tender itself, but things outside of the Box tender. So it forced our institutions to actually start thinking about where is our data and what does that mean for us. We managed to do a really nice collaboration on the legal stuff and the contract work between the countries, much thanks to Uninet. It also made it very clear for us as Nordic NRENs, as well as Nordnet, that we keep track on what happened on all these personal data legislations. It showed the importance of pushing deployment at the universities. We can't just say we have launched a service. We need to actually help the universities, together with the service provider, if that's the case, to launch the service at the universities. And doing the whole contract handling, agreements, risk assessments is expensive and time consuming. The figure there you'll have to talk to Jan about, but I believe him. Each service is about 100,000 Norwegian crowns, which is a lot of money. And this is only Uninet time. This is not the university time considered.
It's mostly legal time.
Yeah, legal time. All right, so what's the NREN role in this? What do we do and what should we do? We should definitely share the burden of work that a tender is. We should definitely lower the cost for our universities, our customers, since, I mean, if we do it for the whole Nordics, we hopefully get better deals due to being more users. The whole thing about collecting use cases or documentation from the early adopters and showing that to new customers coming into the service after it has been launched, and act as a hub for those of our customers using it. Box specifically, Nordnet adds a proxy. In the Box case, it's really needed, since Box don't do, at least they didn't when we started using the service. They don't do entitlement filtering, so anyone with a valid account at the university would be able to create a Box account, since most of the universities only offer the service to employees. We had to put the proxy between. It also makes it simpler to add a new site. They are already in the federation, at least that's the status in Sweden. So there's no work to be done in any IDP setups at the university when we add them to the Box service. It actually makes the NREN a bit visible and the federation a bit visible, which is a good marketing opportunity. Unfortunately, it also adds one extra point of failure, and we have seen that failure actually happen. It shouldn't do it any more times, but once is enough. And yeah, we talked about this. The tender is valid for 4 years. 1 year has already gone by. We need to start thinking about the next, what we should do about that. One big question, or the big question, is will the in-country storage be a demand from the universities? And will we be able to find a service that is good enough for everyone, that is within the Nordics or within the country? Or do we end up with not one cloud storage service, but two, one in-country and one fancy with all bells and whistles in the US? I'm ahead of time. My presentation is done. Do you have any questions? If you have questions, you have to wait for a microphone. Over there. We can take it up first.
Hello.
Oh.
I'm coming from Oslo University College. We use Box somehow, some, not as a main source for store files. I wonder what happens when people are leaving the organization. Will the files be there, or for how long?
That's actually up to each university to decide. Some of the universities, at least in the US, this is mostly student accounts. They allow the account to leave the enterprise with all the files intact. I guess you need to handle the box service the same way as you do on your home directories on the local file storage. Most universities hopefully have some kind of process where files gets redirected to the manager or the chief. The same can be done with Box. So it's up to the university, and there are lots of features within Box that we can actually send files to each other.
The cost for the data handling contract, legal fees. We at SurfNet did it with Google. It costed us about 100,000 euros. It's impossible for a university to carry those costs. It's almost impossible for an NREN to do it. Yes, you can do it on the one basis for the box, but as soon as you want to do 6 or 8 or 10, it becomes impossible. So the future would be to do this on international scale and do it European-wide, and you either have the one who does it, who has the immediate need for it, carry it, but does an NDA, so it covers the whole of Europe, or you do it together. Is that something you're considering for your next procurement phase?
If you want me to answer, have I thought about it? No. Does it sound like a great idea? Yes. For us, we need to start thinking about it like now for our next tender, and we need to start the discussions with our customers. So that's the first steps. But definitely, I mean, if we could work together, we should. Not exactly sure on how that should, but
there's a service activity, SA7, which is cloud services. But which will be engineered for supply chain, in which a lot of these things will be looked at on an international European level, and we're looking especially at NRENs who can contribute, who got an immediate need, and then we can do that on a European basis. So I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Yeah, we'll exchange contact information afterwards. Great. Any other questions? Both Harry and Frode is in the audience from Finland and Norway, so if you have any questions about the deployment in the different countries, you can always ask me, but they might know more about it. Hopefully they know more about it. Right, if nothing else, thanks.
Do you hear me? Yes. The next talk will be made by two speakers. Michel Wetz is procurement advisor at SurfNet. He's project manager for procurement processes, working closely with the technical teams in SurfNet. Michel is leading the mobile data services project in Gian 3+. And Fredrik Persson Jonhed is responsible for procurement at Karlstad University in Sweden. He's also working with SUNET, helping the Swedish University and University College getting easy access to IT-related products. Michel and Fredrik will give us a talk about share acquisition of mobile services in 4 countries: Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about an international collaboration project in which we're working together to achieve something which is difficult to achieve alone. And that's what we want to do. We want to make data consumption affordable for students. I can tell you a bit about the how, why, and what. Why we're doing this, how we're doing it, when we're doing it. And afterwards, Fredrik will go into the details about the Swedish participation in this project. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them during the presentations or save them till after. Just to sketch you the NDN landscape, for those of you who don't know it, so you got an NDN in each country, you got the Géant to coordinate this together, and we have Dante in England who coordinates the procurement and the data networks. In this project, it's led by, it's a Géant project led by SurfNet, and SUNET is one of the participants in this project. So why do we need more mobile data for students? Well, we've seen the development that we got new cloud services coming along. We've got massive open online courses available. Students are more and more going away from the campus, and they expect or want to be able to access data anytime, any place, anywhere. And unfortunately, they now have to move from Wi-Fi point to Wi-Fi point because 3G, 4G data is relatively expensive. The data bundles are relatively small. They're afraid for a price shock, bill shock if they go over the bundles. So they're not taking up all these new developing services. And that's what we want to do something about it. I'm not saying that we want to make it free, but we want to make it affordable. So what do we want to achieve? Well, we started off with 5 countries: Czech Republic, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, Portugal, representing 3.2 million users, and the users are staff and students of higher education. So one denominator on all these 5 countries, and we're following the European tendering that we will exchange information on a transparent basis with all the providers. And what we decide on that we want to have an agreement between the NDN and the provider stipulating, okay, these are the conditions under which it can use its normal B2C, business to consumer propositions towards students and staff. It will be individual agreements, then normal agreements between them and the staff and the students signed by them. So SUNET is not seeking commission. All discounts we realize will go completely to the students. Why are we doing this? Well, there's simply nobody else who would do this. There's nobody else representing the whole community of students in a country, let alone over Europe. So we thought we would take this upon ourselves, because we feel that even though normally the universities, which are the clients of the NDNs, the students are their clients, and if they have a need and we can help that to realize that, we should do so. So how do we go about it? Well, we thought about it, and we thought we'd focus on discounted existing proposition because a lot of providers find it difficult to create new propositions, but to discount existing ones is relatively easy for them. And to award primarily on larger data bundles, that's what we want to achieve. We looked, currently we're in a phase that we've got a draft RFP and sort of stipulates what we're looking for, what we want to achieve, and then we now have dialogue sessions with the providers in the individual countries, checking with them whether that's realistic for them and maybe it should be adjusted. We started off with looking at a smartphone subscription, voice and data for 20 euros and data only for 10 euros. And for some countries that may be too high, for other countries it may be that students and staff are willing to pay more for a higher price point with a higher data bundle. That's why we're having interaction with the providers. They know much more about the market, they know about the marketing. It's our aim to go towards a 40% uptake. So we want to have 40% of all Swedish staff and students use it during the contract period of 2.5 years. And that would result in about 176,000 subscriptions for that provider. And that's quite an interesting number for them. And we offer them to use of the federative authentication mechanism to check the eligibility of student and staff for this subscription. Basically, there's two things needed to make the success. We need a really good proposition with good enough discounts for students to recognize it and to take it up. And we need a good marketing effort to make sure that the students know about it. Ireland was not part of this project because they needed to have a new proposition in place at the beginning of this academic year. They had a thank you. They did this for about 6 years already. 2 3-year contracts, but they were both focusing on data only. And the last one had 15 gigabytes for 10 euros. And they saw a yearly 40% increase of the data consumption of students. And the average student taking up this deal in Ireland at the beginning of this year was consuming 12 gigabytes. And that is a huge amount more than we see in any other country. Most countries is around 400, 700 megabytes. In Sweden it's about 1.1, 1.3 gigabytes, the average data consumption, but not more. And that's what we faced. That's a lot of providers told us, you're crazy, students don't need 15 gigabytes. No, you don't see them needing it because it makes it so expensive for them to use it. Don't turn it around. But that's the way the market acts. So the new proposition available now for Irish students is 25 gigabytes for 10 euros, data only, or for the smartphone, 200 minutes, 300 text messages, and 3 calls within the provider, and 5 gigabytes for 20 euros. Ideally, we would love to see unlimited voice and 25 gigabytes of data for the smartphone, and then you use your smartphone with tethering as a Wi-Fi access point for all your laptop and your tablets. That is unlikely. Providers are really seeing data consumption on smartphones as the biggest chunk of their profits, and they will not quickly give us that many gigabytes on the smartphone subscription just because the other offers would look so poor. So once they go that road, there are other groups who will stand up. And that is what we're facing. We see providers saying students don't need that much data. The margins are too low to give an extra discount. They're saying we already have student propositions, and we see that especially the larger ones therefore are not really interested in this. But luckily smaller ones are. There's 4 countries left. There was no response after the RFI in the Czech Republic, so it's a learning game for us and for providers. It's also new for them. They're not used to having these large numbers of students. Users talked about, is it business to consumer, is it business to business? They also find it difficult to deal with this. The Swedish planning, well, this month we had the dialogue sessions in each of the countries.
talking twice to each of the interested providers. In Sweden, we expect to issue the final RFP in November, submitting proposals in December, and the service to become available for students in the first quarter of 2015. This is the end of my part of the presentation. It is indeed. You want this?
Okay, my name is Fredrik Persson Joned. I work at Karlstad University. The logo with the sun in the middle. There are about 440,000 students and staff in Sweden today at 47 different universities and university colleges. 390,000 students and about 50,000 staff. It depends how we count them. In the market, we have 4 MNOs, mobile network operators in Sweden: Telia Sonera, Tele2, Telenor and Tre. And there are several virtual operators as well. As I told you before, lots of universities. The users are all the universities and all the staff and students there. We demanded that all the operators had at least 30% of 3 times this 440,000 end users. That's in Sweden 528,000, I think it was. Yeah. So to be able to bid for this, you needed to have at least 528,000 users in Sweden today. And here's a table comparing the different offers on the market today, and also the Meteor offer on Ireland for the students there. And if you look at them, you can see that it's about 20% cheaper. The Meteor offer is about 20% cheaper than the best offer in Sweden today. If you say that the next gigabyte is a little bit less expensive than the previous one, and also that Meteor has a less comprehensive scheme for voice and text on Ireland. This is flat rate for unlimited text and voice in Sweden. And Tele2 and Telia has offers for students and young people in Sweden which are up to 20% lower than the other offers, up to, so it's not that. And we are hoping for 20, aren't we? 20 euros. Observations so far. Access to email is the single most important thing when it comes to marketing for them. It has to be cheap. And unfortunately, Sunet or any other organization in Sweden cannot give them access to this. Not directly anyway. Access to campus and access to point of contact is not that important. It's a too expensive way to market this kind of products. And it's very valuable for them and also get access to the staff as well. They want to be able to give these offers to staff as well. And so far, the dialogue sessions have resulted in we're going to do different RFPs in different countries. It's not going to be the same RFP in Sweden as in the other countries. And as a consequence of this, we need to adjust the timetable per country to allow for the best results. We earlier aimed for October, not November, so that's a difference. And this is the first attempt to do a collaborated approach to the market by the NRENs, so lessons will be learned for the future, hopefully. That's all from me as well. Questions for Michel and myself?
Like Fredrik is saying, it's the first effort in a collaboration on procurement. I think it would be, in my opinion, it's very efficient. It raises the quality and lowers the cost to work together. And working with 5 countries on this project is has been great. It helps you see each other's points, it helps you raise the quality, it helps you be able to compare the other responses you get from providers in other countries. It helps you focus and shape your points of view, and that will increase the quality of the final RFP. Will it always work? No. Come on guys, we want to be innovative. We didn't want a 5% discount. We wanted something which was really standing out to the normal offers available now. And that means taking a chance. So some countries it will work, some countries it may fail, but that's what we're there for.
But there are differences between the markets as well, I guess.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we need to adjust for them.
Yeah. And if you're interested in working together on these kind of projects, there will be in GN4, which starts next April, a supply chain activity looking at centralized procurement, at these kind of things, working together, and be happy to be great if you would join us. Yeah.
Did you consider data roaming between the countries?
We looked at so many things. We looked at data roaming between the countries, and then we thought, but hey, in December 2015, the new law comes into effect, and then roaming within Europe is free. And do we really have to look for really alternative propositions just for those few students who can afford to go to America and Asia? And in the end, we decided it's better to focus on a better discount for the whole community than these niches. We also looked at, is it interesting for providers to upload data to the SUNET network? But none of them are interested in that. Because it's for them comparing the cost of doing that versus what does it save them. In the end, we found out that basically we're asking for is a good discount. And we would love to get more. I mean, we've got minimum principles like net neutrality and that kind of stuff. That's all going to be in there. But it's not going to be, it would be nice to get a system where you could pre-program the SIM cards so they automatically have an EduRoam account on there. I mean, that's something we're talking about, but that's a wish. I mean, if a provider in Sweden says, I'm interested, but I won't offer that, then it's not going to be a knockout criteria. We can't afford that yet. We'd love to do more, but have to be realistic.
Some more questions or comments? Okay, give them a hand. The next speaker is Paul Rose. He is a procurement manager in Dante and a task leader for procurement in the GN3 Plus project. He will give us a talk about the PRISM project, a European framework agreement for optical transmission equipment and services. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Let's put my glasses back on so I can see what I'm doing. Thank you. And just click to make the slides move on here, do I? Frederick? Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon everybody. As you heard, I'm Paul Rouse. I really wanted to spend a bit of time with you this afternoon to unpack what you heard in the opening plenary yesterday from René. He spoke about the opportunities for procurement, but he also spoke about the challenges and how some of his team have their hair going grey. Well, the news is it's worse than that. All my hair's going. It's I would like grey hair, but unfortunately it's a bigger problem. We're here in a university, so I'd like to take the opportunity to do some education with you. So in my talk, we're going to spend a moment talking about the theory of aggregated procurement, public sector procurement, and sharing and making sure perhaps you understand some of the concepts of what's happening in those procurement activities for the services and goods that you probably use within your networks or environments. Let's talk about some of the practice as well. There's a case study in here as well, Project Prism, that some of you may have heard about, certainly in the presentation earlier on today, I think, or from Lars Langberg at Nordnet, hearing about the 100 gig network rollout. That stemmed from Project Prism, so we'll have a look at actually what we've done on the procurement side, and then I'll take a few moments as well to share some reflections about what's happening in the world of procurement and perhaps what we could do in the future. So, very simple concept first of all, the idea of buying things together. It's something that we probably have all experienced in our life. If you put together a demand and a need, you can in theory get some better prices from the marketplace. You see that in all sorts of fields, be it people buying services and reselling them on. The supermarkets will buy in bulk and then sell it on because they can buy it at a much better price. I don't think there's any challenge to that simple economic model. When we do that as professional organisations, be they in the public sector or private sector, that can mean an expensive procurement. That becomes slightly more complicated when many organisations like ourselves in the public sector are subject to the European procurement directives. So those European procurement directives are set across Europe, then each member state cascades those and brings them into their own national law. One benchmark figure that's been passed around for public sector procurements is that each procurement can cost around 50,000 euros, 60,000 euros. Actually takes some quite specialist skills to carry those procurements out as well. So it's not an easy task, but there are organisations who are doing this day in, day out. There's some examples up there. Our hosts at the moment, Nordnet, clearly are doing that at present in a variety of different ways, whether they're buying the services in and to aggregate them together to then sell them as a different offering to you as customers, or like in the Netherlands, an organisation like Surf Market, which is putting in place brokerage arrangement for end users to use and access advantage deals, or in the UK there's a government called the service is G-Cloud, where they put in place arrangements on behalf of all public sector bodies in the UK, so you can just easily access those. Let's unpack how they do this magic then in some of those options, and there's really two key models I want to share with you. There are perhaps some other ways of doing this, but let's have a look at the theory of a couple of key models. So the first one has some technology, some technical jargon in there. We're in a technical environment, so people will probably be comfortable with that, but let's take a moment to make sure everybody understands. In public sector you have something called a contracting authority. This is the legal entity, the body that is subject to public sector procurement regulations, so the things that flow down from the EC directive. A contracting authority can also be a centralised purchasing body. This is where a contracting authority acts on behalf of other entities. So many of the organisations, the examples that I gave on the previous slide, are acting as a CPB, that centralised purchasing body. So they're putting in place an arrangement that many people can benefit from. So one way of doing this is that a CPB will go to the market and say, I want to put in place an arrangement whereby any of the organisations on this list can access the goods and services, and they can access those goods and services without having to undertake a full procurement themselves. So they put in place something called a framework agreement. And you'll notice there's a number of different relationships here between the parties. So the centralised purchasing body, the CPB, will have a relationship with suppliers. Now that may be one supplier for a particular commodity. We heard about the box example earlier. Or it may be for a range of providers to cover a range of technologies and solutions. So I'll tell you about Project Prism in a while, and that'll be an example where there's multiple frameworks in place with multiple providers. Then each of the contracting authorities that want to enjoy and benefit from those framework agreements will then contract directly with the suppliers. So there's no contract between here, the contracts exist in these verticals. There's a number of different ways that a contracting authority can call down from a framework agreement. I don't plan to tell you the detail of that now. Suffice to say that the time from I want one of those to getting one of those on your desk in the network is much shorter when you use the framework. As you heard in the box example earlier of that sort of end-to-end total time period, just the framework cooldown part is shorter than that end-to-end. So that's the benefit there, that you get realising those shorter timescales. Also, you should, in theory, if the deal's being done right in that framework, get access to lower costs. We find, unfortunately, the public sector world, and lawyers particularly, who like to make millions of euros out of people doing procurement incorrectly. There'll be the no fee, or no win, no fee type lawyers, and they will circle like vultures around public sector land, helping out suppliers, challenge organisations in procurements. So it's actually quite a scary place sometimes to carry out public sector procurements, and you want to be doing these right, because if you do it wrong, there can actually be some financial penalties for carrying these out wrong. So another benefit is if you've got the right CPBs with the right skills carrying these out, you can exploit some of these scarce procurement skills to minimise any risks around frameworks. Also, the EC directive sets out, yes, this is absolutely a valid way of carrying out procurements. However, your eyes are probably being attracted by the big red cross. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean health and good, that means there's something bad. Across Europe, whilst we're supposed to be one European Union, we don't all actually recognise procurement in the same way. There are some countries that have a national interpretation of the EC directive that is different to others. So we've carried out some analysis, commissioned some legal resource just to validate our findings, and we looked at 4 countries, just a sample: France, Italy, Germany and Poland. Make this slightly interactive. One of those countries won't allow centralised purchasing bodies to be active in another member state, i.e. they can't recognise a framework let in another member state by a centralised purchasing body. Any guess which one of those 4 countries doesn't recognise their cross-member CPB? It would be a good guess. Being a Brit, I can't say too much about France, though, particularly as I'm being streamed. Our colleagues in Renater could be throwing daggers at me right now. It wasn't France. Any other guesses? Come on, the odds are improving now. I'll help you out. Begins with a P. Excuse me, Poland. So Poland won't allow, at present, recognise this mechanism. So it's not an answer to all of our prayers. So let's have a look at the next slide. Excuse me. And another model. Has anyone heard of Teckle? Okay. So this is something that Norginet rely upon. This is something that the organisation I work for, Dante, in delivering the Jean network, rely upon. This is an arrangement whereby you can actually circumvent or don't have to follow the EC procurement directive. If you can set up a legal arrangement between an NREN, as is familiar to ourselves, or it could be the universities then into an NREN, so you could replace NRENs with universities and then this would be the NREN. But if the NRENs pass certain tests, and I'll tell you about those tests in a moment, those organisations can freely buy in these relationships here without having to undertake a procurement. So for example, the university that Frederick represents can come to Norginet and say, I would like connectivity services, and that is completely valid from a procurement perspective. They do not have to undertake any other procurement activity. Of course, the Teckle organisation must comply with the procurement directive, so this relationship and establishing this relationship is still subject to those procurement directives. But for the end consumer, if you like, not necessarily an end user, but a contracting authority, they have it much easier. They can consume these services. But to do this, you can't freely do this, just decide, oh, I like that NREN over there, or I've heard about this great box deal. Here I am in Poland. Not that may be a good example, but here I am in France. I've heard about the great work that's been done in the Nordics in box. I want to go and benefit from that deal. That won't work because the tests won't necessarily pass. So for this to be valid at a very high level, there needs to be a degree of control. So these organisations up here must exercise control over Tecal. Whilst it's a separate legal entity, they must be very much governed. The board, the decisions that are taken, the authorisations for activities must be controlled by those above it. So it's like a virtual extension of themselves. The second part is, of their activities, about 80% of them must be for servicing those customers. They can't just suddenly go out and say, hey, I'm going to go and start buying buses or aeroplanes, if that's not the business of those that control above them. And the final part is, it can't have private equity in there. So one of the suppliers can't invest in this organisation and allow its operation. So it very much has to still feel and be a public sector organisation. So that's your part in education, and understand a little bit about procurement and what procurement managers in the public sector, people like myself, Michelle, Frederick, these are the things that we worry about and we have to work with. Let me tell you now about an example of where there was a need and an opportunity to pilot across Europe, across the NRENs behind and involved in the Géant project, said, let's have a go at doing this aggregated procurement. So I think this has been one of the first case examples of a pan-European aggregated procurement. We named it Project Prism, but like with the box example, that title was given pre-Snowden. Unfortunately, with the advent of what we learnt about Snowden and the disclosure on WikiLeaks, it perhaps wasn't the best name for a project, but it was called Project Prism. So if that's how you hear about it, this is what it's about. Let me take you through. So Project Prism, very simply, was, if you remember in sort of slide scenario 1, was a framework agreement. So this was Dante acting as the centralised purchasing body on behalf of every NREN across Europe, and that includes all of those behind Norginet, were identified to say there's a framework that's going to be available for DWDM equipment, software, support and services that they can then use and benefit from. We've put the life of that framework out for 8 years. For some who know a bit about procurement legislation, that's quite challenging. Typically frameworks are 4 years, but because of the service lifespan of DWDM equipment, we felt we could justify the huge capital investment. An 8-year framework was appropriate because you would still need to buy interfaces, service and support over that 8-year period. At the end of the procurement process, there were actually 4 suppliers who were awarded a framework. I won't read the names out, you can read for yourselves. And how that looks and feels now, if people don't have my contact details, I'll freely provide those for you, but you can access a service catalogue. So it's not as glossy and glitzy as perhaps your experience of shopping on something like Amazon that describes the services and customer reviews, but very simply it will give you a headline. These are the product ranges, these are the functionalities, these are the services that are offered, and these are the headline prices that you can buy these services for. So in theory, you could go and approach any one of these vendors and say to them, I need to expand my Sienna network and I want to buy some more cards, extend my network links, put a new link, commission a new link, and I need a new network node. Can I buy that from you, please, through the Prism framework? And they will gladly welcome you with open arms, and you won't have to undertake any other procurement activity. You'll sign a call-down contract and off you go. There is a benefit for those who have an opportunity to refresh their entire network or a significant network element, that you can undertake a process of further competition. So what you can do, rather than advertise a full ODU, is you can invite these 4 providers to submit a proposal to you for your requirement. Now that reduces the timescale taken to undertake that procurement activity. So you still get some competition, and they'll be keen on the price, maybe certain have characteristics for the countries that you're in better than the others, be it in support or implementing those services. You might want to do that competition to test that. The frameworks, because we're representing the entire European community, the starting point, the prices, some of those terms have been included in those contracts. Of course, with a framework, there is no commitment to a supplier, so I'm not going to stand up here and say these frameworks will beat any price that you can secure for yourself, because in awarding a framework, I can't guarantee any benefit. But what I know is, when we ran this exercise, we took Norginet's need as the pilot example. So if you, in your mind, you paint a picture that there were two procurements running in parallel. There was the procurement for the framework and the procurement actually for Nordunet's network requirement running in parallel. So we received a sort of an answer for a service catalogue in the portfolio, and we received a proposal and a detailed design with pricing for Nordunet's need. And the pricing that was offered for the actual specific commitment that Nordunet would make was better than the price in the framework. So if you can do the further competitions, you're likely to get better pricing. That's only fair from the market. They're only going to give you more benefit if you will commit to make an investment with them. As I've mentioned to you before, the benefit of these frameworks is the time to contract. It very much reduces that, hey, we've got a need, here's the solution. Last slide. Let's just reflect on everything then and what's happening. For those that enjoy reading procurement newsletters and updates from the European Commission, I'm sure that's all on your reading lists. You'll know that there's some new procurement legislation that's been released. When the EC kick out new legislation, member states have 2 years to implement it. So by 18th of April 2016, all of your procurement managers in country or those that practice with procurement will probably be subject to some new procurement regulations. Some of those are likely to be beneficial in that there are now going to be shorter timescales for procurement that are available for use. There are some other slight subtle changes to the rules. Have a look at those, understand them, there may be some changes for you. But for this presentation, the two that I wanted to highlight were Article 11 and Article 39. Article 11 reinforces the position of centralised purchasing bodies. In some of those member states, currently, under the current legislation, it's not expressly stated that centralised purchasing bodies can exist and be recognised. On balance, it's not said that they can't, and as is a principle in the EC directive, if an organisation wants to do that, it's probably likely that it will be okay. But the new directive expressly sets out that centralised purchasing bodies are a valid procurement mechanism. Article 39 goes on to say that a centralised purchasing body in one member state can be used by another member state or a contracting authority in another member state. However, that sounds like really good news, but ... some of the member states won't be implementing Article 39. They have a choice whether to implement it or not. So unfortunately, this isn't going to solve all of our problems, and now when we do public sector aggregated procurement across Europe for every contracting authority, the legislation won't validate our approach. So there will still be some exceptions and testing to be done on a country by country basis to say, can we benefit from doing this deal together? Checkpoints for you if you're ever involved in any of these things, just to make sure technically you're doing it right. The ODU notice, golden rule number 1, if you're acting as a centralised purchasing body doing a deal on behalf of the others, make sure in the ODU notice you are identifying the entities that you are buying on behalf of. If they're not listed, or a URL identifying where information about them exists isn't included, then those entities can't benefit from it. It's a very simple test. If the advert was known in the marketplace and the market could reasonably see who you were buying on behalf of, then it's up to the market to say, yes, I was going to have a go at that because I could see all of that opportunity was included. But if suddenly you start to add people to that, they weren't in a fair position. They may say, well, I never knew it was going to be used for those organisations. That's why I didn't choose to bid. It's not fair, and they'd have a fair grounds to challenge you. So make sure if you want to do something collectively, you identify all of the parties in the ODU notice. Have a think as well about if you're putting in place a framework, how you will award the frameworks and how you will award the call-down contracts. I've shared with you the concept of the mini competition and the framework in the first place. How will you make a distinction between when you award the framework, whether that's successful or not, and when you will award the call-down contract? They're probably subtly different things. Governing law, the framework may be let under one country's law, the call-down contracts may need to be under another country's law. How will you cope with those differences? The contracting parties allow for differences as well for financial reasons, for tax, VAT purposes. It may make sense to contract with a different legal entity of a supplier. so one of their group companies, so just to make sure those provisions are allowed. So they may have an in-country presence that makes more sense for you to contract with rather than the entity that had secured the framework contract. Finally, some thoughts and experience that largely stem from Prism as well. Commitment. 6-month project at best for one of these, but absolutely make sure the people are at the table. Don't do one of these frameworks on the basis that you'll build it and people will come. The market don't respond well to that. I don't think you get a good outcome. It makes it very valuable if you can bring a real life case example. In all of the supplier meetings, I worked with a really good team from Nordinet who were at the table with me, and that really made it real, and then an order followed straight after as well, so it gave it good credibility as a project, and that's just reinforced by that active participation. So in any of these projects, and this isn't unique to procurement, this is any collective virtual working, make sure you've got the right people who can make an active contribution to that project. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've got some things to consider. If nothing else, you know about Project Prism, so for your own networks as well, it's a route that you may be able to consider. I know there are some Nordic NRENs that have spoken to me already to investigate that, and I've been following up. Welcome any questions. Thank you very much for your time and listening.
Thanks a lot. Any questions? Okay, ready for gala dinner? I have to remind you, bring your badge. Yes, give Paula a hand.